Oh yeah, I see a number of folks there.
Great. Yeah. So we
26.
can begin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Corey Atkinson, NABJ parliamentarian, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for this very important chapter board training webinar. As you know, chapters, they play a crucial role on the local level by ensuring that the association stays true to its mission through a wide array of programming and one-on-one connections with our members. And so this morning we are providing this webinar to assist you, our local NABJ leaders, to help sharpen your leadership skills and to hopefully to help you learn new skills that will foster good governance and also to ensure that your organizations are financially stable. So this morning we have two NABJ veterans and experts who will help you to do that. We have NABJ Board Treasurer Greg Marson and former NABJ parliamentarian Robin Washington. Later today, we will hear from President Glover, who will offer some words of wisdom and encouragement to you guys. So we will first have Treasurer Greg Marson to speak about financial management.
First of all, good morning. I know for a lot of you, getting up at this early hour on Saturday morning is an anathema, but appreciate it. The treasurer in most associations is usually just considered the person who keeps the books. But within the way our organization is structured, the treasurer is a very important officer and should be equal power with the president in terms of operation of the chapter. The treasurer is your check and balances person, the person who actually has a good handle on the numbers and can say, wait a minute, let's not go down that road because it's not fiscally stable. Now, I've got a checklist of a couple of things I want to run past you. I would recommend, if you have a chance, pull out a piece of paper and just jot it down. I know a piece of paper and writing is old school, but it still works and it's hack proof. First thing, your filings. Treasurer should make it their business to ensure that the chapter does all their filings with the state and with the federal government, i.e., your corporate registration, and also make sure you have a correct tax ID number and tax status. Quite often we think, oh, we've got an association, we're automatically a charity. No, you're not. To become a charity, to be recognized as a charity, you need to have what's called 501c3 status designation from the IRS. And how do we go about getting that? Well, first thing with the IRS is you get a tax ID number. You used to have to call them or write them. Now you can go online and apply for a tax ID number under whatever name that you're filing as your corporate registration in the state or jurisdiction where you're incorporated. That usually takes about 2 weeks. You'll get a form, you'll get a temporary number online, then you'll get a hard copy in the mail from the IRS saying, hey, this is your tax ID number. You can take that to a bank. You can take that to whoever may require it to prove that you are legitimate, you have a tax ID number and so forth. This comes in handy when raising funds, and some donors will require that number before they'll write you a check. Bank accounts. There's a process with doing bank accounts. Yes, you can go down to your local bank at the supermarket that you've used or the bank that you've used forever as your personal account, but you're operating a small business operation there or an association operation. Make sure your banker understands that this is what you're trying to do, that you're not running a situation where you have employees, where you've got pensions, where you've got a lot of the usual expenses associated with running a business. I highly recommend that if you're going to raise money for scholarships and things like that, that you have two separate accounts, one for operations and one for scholarships and philanthropic stuff. Keeping this money separate will keep you out of trouble, and it also make it easier down the line for other things that you want to do. These days, more and more banks are doing cashless transactions or paperless transactions where you're doing things using either debit cards or online filings. It can be a challenge to keep all of that straight. So you can arrange with your bank that you can use your debit card to pay certain bills, or that you can take cash out, but you can only take it out at one location so that you don't have somebody going all around town, all around the country using your debit card for whatever. That is something that keeps you out of trouble and keeps you close to where you need to be in terms of keeping track of your money. And the other thing with the bank accounts and all of this is taxes. I know it's a dirty word. Nobody likes taxes, but pay your taxes. If you don't have to pay them, at least do your filings. Normally, associations like NABJ chapters simply have to do what's called a 990 form. Good morning, Johnston. Glad you're able to join us. And I know some of us are having trouble logging into this system. And this was where having an accountant available to service your account makes sense. Yes, it costs a few dollars to pay an accountant, but a good accountant will keep you out of trouble. It will keep your book straight. It will help you as you're doing things, trying to apply for grants and other support for projects you're going to do. That takes me to my next point, which is policies. There should be a written policy about how payments will be made. Will they be made via paper check? Will they be made electronically? Who can authorize payments? I would recommend having a record of the executive board meeting saying, hey, we've got these bills this month that we have to pay. Treasurer offers a motion to make sure that these bills are paid, authorize the payment of the bill. It is seconded, approved, it's on the record. It also prevents misunderstandings as to who is responsible, what bill was supposed to have been paid when. Some chapters take the attitude and the view that the chapter funds can be used to support chapter leadership to participate in certain national or regional events. That's money that should come out of your operations and not your scholarship fund. And so, again, that's something that you need to have written authorization for, either by a motion or some kind of official record saying, yes, this has been approved. This keeps you out of trouble down the line. Conflicts of interest. This is critical. As chapter officers, it is easy to say, hey, I can use this to get myself hooked up and get a contract from the chapter to produce video or produce a newsletter. No, you can't. As a chapter officer, you should not be benefiting financially from the chapter's operations. You have to have very clean hands. So that means you take bids from outside parties and you do the contracts and so forth, or agreements for services. And again, the treasurer comes in handy here, because the treasurer, along with the president, should sign off on any and all agreements for services or goods that the chapter is purchasing. That way there's a record that it has been approved. And going back to your bank account, if you're still using paper checks, at the chapter level, you should require a double signature on all checks. And your bank should know that if a check comes in without the double signature, either not to honor it or call somebody and verify that it's good. This, again, protects you. I share this experience with you because here in Atlanta, where I live, several years ago, we had a chapter treasurer who decided he was going to use our funds to support a bad drug habit. And it cost us a lot of money. So again, double signature on everything prevents a lot of misunderstandings down the line. Board members, as I said earlier, should not be receiving direct benefits from the chapter or from the association just simply because they're on the board, unless you want to put that into an operating account specified for that. It just, again, it's a good look as you go forward and you're starting to apply for grants and some kinds of support financing. Some of these agencies will want to look at, well, are you keeping your books clean? Are your board members hands-free? And are your board members participating in the fundraising activities? And even if that means every board member puts in $5 a month as a donation to the chapter's operations, it helps in the overall fiscal health and picture of how you're getting things done. These days, more and more, we're running into systems of cashless payments: Zelle, Cash Pay, Quick Pay, PayPal. Make sure that whoever your financial institution is, that they accept these, that it's a simple process for someone to use, so that if you want to collect dues using Zelle or PayPal or any of these other applications, that it's easy to do and you don't have to give away too much of your confidential information without a check or balance on it. And lastly of all, let's talk about budgets. A budget is a roadmap. It is a financial roadmap of what you plan to do or want to do for the chapter in a certain time or for a certain project. It is not written in stone. It's usually written on paper and it can be adjusted, but it gives you a guideline of what you want to do. I strongly recommend that you have budgets set up not only for your routine operations, like how much it's going to cost you for maintaining your digital presence, i.e. website or anything else like that. If you have to pay any rents, if you have fees for your bank accounts, figure all that out. Take a guesstimate, and you can usually get the numbers from your banker or whomever, what these services are going to cost, how much it's going to cost you for your accountant every year, and have a list of it. That's a budget. That way you know how much you need to raise to meet these obligations every year. For outside projects, i.e. you're doing a fundraiser or you're doing an event, you should have a separate budget for that. That way you know how much it costs to rent the space, to provide the food, to provide security, and on and on and on and on. And that way you have a budget, a framework to look at and say, okay, did we meet our budget number? Do we have the revenue coming in? Can we make this work without going in the hole? And quite often you're able to get corporate support, i.e. from UPS or Coca-Cola, for example, for your project or your event. And if you're spending that money on that project or event, you can see where it matches up. And occasionally, they have foundations that were willing to partner with you. But to qualify for many foundation grants, you have to be able to open up your books and your budget process. So that's the 15-second version of what's going on. And we'll be here to answer questions. I'm available to answer questions, not only today, but you can reach out to me at any time. My email is a strange one. It's griotSouth, GRIOTSOUTH @cs.com. And my mobile is 404-372-3269. Now, with this system here, you can actually hit the chat button and send me a note via chat while we're doing the session. We can just answer any particular questions for your chapter. That's what I've got for now, and I'm open for questions or anything else Corey wants me to do. So everybody's finances are in great shape. That's good. Okay, Corey, are we recording this to share with other groups?
Yes, it's being recorded, and I'm not sure if anyone can see.
Chauncey has a question. What's your question, Chauncey? Okay. Marie, here we go. Okay.
And in the meanwhile, guys, if you have questions, you can type those in the comment section for Greg and for Robin later on.
Good morning, Bruce. Okay, from Chauncey, we have this trouble doing events sometimes because we don't want to spend any money. Because we don't have any money. That's the big conundrum. For example, if you're doing an annual scholarship awards event, there are ways to raise money. For example, some chapters, in addition to ticket sales, will tie it into awards, so they'll charge a fee for the award entry process. That's revenue you can generate and put into your scholarship account to help sort of seed the process. But again, you want to keep that separate from operating accounts, which pays your routine daily bills. And sometimes you can go to local sponsors, underwriters, for a little seed money to get you started. One of the things that groups that I find is very helpful is the usual local Coca-Cola bottlers. They love to get involved with these kinds of things. And, you're asking them for $3,000, $5,000 to help get a process started. For them, that's pocket change. Look at the large employers in your area outside of government agencies. Government agencies are a different issue to deal with, but large private employers, and see if they're willing to support it. Also, you can get some seed money from the media operations occasionally in the community you serve in. It's not unusual to walk into the general manager's office or the publisher's office and say, hey, our chapter is doing X, Y, Z, and we'd like to know if you'd be willing to support it and be able to argue, make an argument for them as to what you want to do with the money and what the benefit will be for them, because sometimes this is cheaper than buying an ad or doing any other kinds of public relations. Does that answer your question, Chauncey? Okay, I'm waiting for a typed response. It does. Okay. Okay, Carolyn Mayo asked about a statement about when a motion is required to approve the payment. Your executive board, when you routinely meet, or your board of directors when you routinely meet, should be, as part of the record of the routine meetings, is a motion from the treasurer or the fiscal officer saying, requesting authorization to pay the following bills or to pay routine monthly bills for the services that we use every month or quarterly or so forth. Just do that as that's when where the motion should be made. If it's seconded and approved, it's on the record as being approved. You don't want to get in the habit of just paying things without the rest of the body knowing about it. And also, with the debit cards and use of the debit cards, really closely monitor that. And I recommend a third member of the board have access to the bank statements, in addition to the president and the treasurer. 3 sets of eyes are better than 2. 2 sets are obviously better than 1, to make sure that people aren't using the association's accounts as a personal piggy bank. That should not happen. That should not happen. That should not happen. As you can tell, I'm quite serious about that. And it not only creates a financial problem for the chapter, it sets bad precedent. And in some cases, depending upon the state you're in, it's a criminal violation. We don't want anything involved like that anywhere near any NABJ chapter. Linda Lockhart, I agree about seeking sponsorship from local companies in St. Louis. A chapter has seen scholarship in general revenue grow from holding events and seeking sponsors who are recognized on the printed program and given a few minutes to speak at the event. And again, this is a way to make a few bucks, put it in the right account, and go from there. Any other questions? Melanie Eversley. Good morning, Melanie. Hope things are going well in South Jersey. Chapters taking in entries for award contests. Entry fees going directly into our treasury. Is this okay, or do you recommend we create a separate account? Oh, she's in New York. Normally, if you run everything through your operations account, you can do that. But if you're tying it to a scholarship fundraiser at the same time, I recommend running those entry fees through a scholarship account. But you don't need a separate account for award entry fees. You can just create that as a category of revenue that you've got coming in, because you're going to have that same category to pay expenses, to pay for trophies, or to ship the entries to a third party for judging and things like that. So yes, you can do that. Again, careful record keeping. Journalists by nature hate to do finances. It's just not how we operate. But you don't have to be a CEO, CFO, just have to be able to treat it the same way you treat your personal budgets, so that you know you got money coming in before you pay money out. And try not to do something that you don't have money budgeted for, or you don't see a way to raise the money for. By the way, Melanie, take care of that ankle. Okay, and my mobile is 404-372-3269. Are there any other questions? Okay. Bianca Flowers. They have a scholarship account for their high school program, First Take. It has been asked by a previous treasurer in the past, but we weren't given access. That will drive you nuts. Treasurer leaves, they're out of town, no one has access. What's wrong with that? When you set up your accounts, no account should be made in the association's name without what's called a written corporate resolution, basically authorizing the opening of an account at a certain financial institution with the signatory names. And you have to make it clear to that institution that every so often we change leadership. And how do you do this transition orderly so that when the new leadership comes in, the new fiscal officers come in, that they are included as signatories and having access to the account. And this should be written down somewhere. It should be written down so that the president has a copy of it, the treasurer has a copy of, who has access, and possibly the secretary or parliamentarian has a copy, so that someone knows how to get into this account, what the passwords are that are necessary if you have to do everything online. But this is where that information has to be shared. It doesn't have to be shared with the entire membership, but at least have access to it. We have seen in some cases where one individual opened an account and all of a sudden they've left town or whatever reason they've left the association and no one can get to the money. That's not a pretty picture, because banks will not release that money unless you threaten them with a major lawsuit, and you really don't want to go through all of that. So again, information sharing among the board is critical. And one other thing I forgot to mention, whenever you have a regularly scheduled meeting of the association general membership, make sure there's a financial report there. Yes, it's boring, it's numbers. Our members tend to fall off and go to sleep because it's not exciting. But make sure that there is at least basic financial, this is how much we took in, this is how much we spent, this is our balance. With a copy of your check register activities so that any paid member can see where their money is. Okay. If we ask them for the access and they refuse, how should we proceed? Normally at the local level with the bank, if they are declining access, ask to take it above them to either the president of the bank or someone above them and explain the process that Jim Jones left town and didn't share the access information or didn't put both names on the account. And usually you can negotiate your way to a settlement like that. But again, anytime you open a bank account, no one person should have total control. It should be several names on it so that if one person leaves, you still have access to the account. And not the co-directors we hired to run First Take. Your co-directors, they're contractors. You as the board are responsible for making sure your finances are correct. Just because you hired someone to do the job for you doesn't mean that they should have control of your finances. It is your money, your funds. These are contractors. They should be able to come to you and say, hey, we've got this thing set up. We need $85 for breakfast. Fine, then you write the check, not them. And then you would have access to the account, not them. And yes, it can be a pain in the neck, but it keeps you involved in it and you keep track of what's going on. The treasurer should be intimately involved, if not intimately, at least well involved in every activity your association does that involves either spending money or bringing money in. And Bianca, we can take this a little further. If you have any questions, you feel free to call me after the session. Look forward to chatting with you. Corey, it's back to you. Corey, upper right, you got unmuted.
Yeah, great. So that was a good round. Again, if you guys have questions, feel free to call or email Greg, and he will move it forward. So now we will have former NABJ parliamentarian Robin Washington, who will go through parliamentary procedures. So
Okay.
you pretty much put everything into perspective what Greg says earlier.
All right. Good morning. I'm going to paste all my info right in the box there, and I'll paste it again at the end of the session. Everybody can hear me, right? At least Greg and Corey. All right. So I'm Robin Washington. I'm your former parliamentarian about 1,000 years ago, and a constant member of the Constitution and Bylaws Committee, and kind of parliamentarian for life for a bunch of organizations have called on me since my tenure at NABJ. the main thing I want to impart on you is what is parliamentary procedure, or really, why do we have it? I'm going to share a little presentation. As soon as I can find it. There we go. And there we go. Question is, why do most organizations have parliamentary procedure? Feel free to jump into it. Just the ABCD or ABCD, you got the idea. A little technical challenge for me to handle this screen and to see what you're typing to. In fact, I don't know if I can handle this screen and see what you're typing. So I'm going to stop the screen there. Anybody see that? Or everybody saw that? So I'll go back to that and talk about it for a second here. The reason we have parliamentary procedure, is it because it's the law? It's because we always have done it that way? It's because it keeps the members so confused they don't know what they're doing? And I think some of you might say that happens. And is it all of the above or none of the above? So somebody said C, which, yeah, that does happen. And the real answer is none of the above here. By the way, if it's, yeah, it's none of the above. And the reason we use parliamentary procedures for any organization is to provide for the will of the majority while protecting the right of the minority to be heard. You could just have the majority ramrod whatever they're doing through, and there's a majority, and you know, they won, they get to say what they want to do. The United States Senate kind of works that way, if you've noticed what's happening under Senator McConnell. Doesn't give a lot to the right of the minority to be heard, but in a good parliamentary procedure situation, you want the right of you want the minority to be heard because they bring different points of view, and the majority may be most of the people, but maybe they hadn't thought of every situation that's out there. I'm going to stop the share because it's a little difficult to see what you guys are all writing at the same time here. And as you can see, that's from a general document on parliamentary procedure, and I can send all this to you. And there's some funny ones. There's one with the video that unfortunately the audio doesn't play in this platform, so I can send that to you too. It gives all kinds of scenarios that we've all gone through. But I'm going to back this up on something that isn't in a general document on parliamentary procedure and ask, why does NABJ, why do NABJ chapters so much stress parliamentary procedure? We almost all chapters, it's not required in your constitution, but almost all chapters have a parliamentarian, and NABJ has a parliamentarian. I have to say, I'm involved in all kinds of organizations, local, national, whatever, grassroots, things with some money to them. As Greg says, none that seem to pay me, but they, in any case, very few of them have parliamentarians. In fact, I really can't think of any that I'm on currently that have a parliamentarian. There's one group, the highly established, it's the local community foundation, gives away millions of dollars, and I have to raise my hand and sort of be the parliamentarian at times and see how much I can convince people I know what I'm talking about, because sometimes we do things that are just not entirely kosher, and you know, I explain to them why. But some suggestions. Why do you think NABJ is so intent on parliamentary procedure? Anybody? Chauncey says to keep meetings and matters orderly. It's a good idea. But I'm going to lead the witness a little bit. Why is this journalist group so intent on this? Okay, so I'll give the answer. It's my theory. Yeah, accountability. We want to be responsible, Linda says. Accountability of board members, Bianca says. Do I remember Robert's rules? Record keeping. Actually, all of the above, except maybe the Robert's Rules part. And my theory, I'd actually like to go back and interview Wayne Dawkins, who's sort of our historian, to prevent conflict of interest, Melanie says. And really talk to maybe some of our founders. Somebody put that in there. It didn't just show up one day that we had parliamentarian, right? And our founders are not all with us anymore. So I'd like to see where that came from. But my suspicion is we are journalists, right? And if we go cover something, we expect everything you guys just said in the comments there. Open meetings, transparency, orderly, responsible. And that's what parliamentary procedure is supposed to help you achieve. I'm not going to say guarantee, nothing's guaranteed, but gives you some rules and framework to operate by. And we have all gone and covered meetings that are not open, that do have conflicts of interest, that do have presidents writing checks to the treasurer, as Greg just pointed out, and not the best financial procedures. And so I suspect that's what we were looking for as journalists. We don't have to have it. There's no law. Remember the first thing in that little quiz there, there's no law saying you have to have parliamentary procedure. The second thing about parliamentary procedure is, what is it? Okay. Somebody mentioned Robert's Rules. And Greg has chimed in here, by the way, to say, during the founders meeting in December 1975, Chuck Stone appointed Allison Davis as parliamentarian to keep that rowdy group under control. And she didn't succeed, did she? But she tried. And thank you, Greg, because I can ask Allison, and that would be an interesting discussion to have. But the point of parliamentary procedure, as you just saw on that slide, is to carry out the rule of the wishes of the majority, but respecting the rights of the minority and hearing what the minority have to say for good governance. And nothing in that says that the rules are the most important thing. We don't meet for the purpose of carrying out the rules. We meet for trying to do the stuff that Greg just said. You want to hold a meeting. You want to hold a forum. Linda talked about the scholarship thing. You want to make the scholarship thing happen, right? So you don't want to have rules that say you can't have a scholarship. You don't want to have rules that make it impossible for the two people who signed a check to actually be in the room at the same time or whatever. You want rules that offer a framework in which you can operate and do things that you need to do. All right. So the second part about Roberts. Roberts, how many people have read Robert's Rules of Order or have a basic idea what it is? Just virtually raise your hand there. Have read it, says Melanie Eversley. Anybody else read Robert's Rules? There's one of our esteemed members, I'm going to be a little teasing here, not say who said, I've read the entire book. Corey, you're a parliamentarian. Have you read that entire book? Unmute. You can answer with...
Not all of it.
All right, not all of it. Linda Lockhart says, basic idea, have not read it cover to cover. How many people, here's the trick answer to the trick question, have read what we used to call an encyclopedia before Wikipedia destroyed the world? How many people have read an encyclopedia cover to cover? Well, you don't have to answer that because you haven't, and you haven't read a dictionary cover to cover. The point is that, as Linda is saying, right, she has not read Robert's Rules of Order cover to cover because it's a reference book. You don't read a dictionary cover to cover. Actually, I think my grandfather read a dictionary cover to cover, but that's, an unusual case. And so you can read this, and it could be interesting reading. If you do read the official, at one point it was Scott Forsman. I don't know who's publishing the official Roberts right now, cover to cover. You might find things that are contradictory, but the whole idea of what is Roberts is questionable. So there was the good General Henry Roberts, who was a general in the United States Army, and he went to a lot of meetings, and he said, these people don't know what they're doing, and they need some order brought to them. He noticed the United States Congress has rules, which are not Roberts' rules. Rules of the House are indigenous to the House. Rules of the Senate are even more arcane and indigenous to the Senate. The late Senator Robert Byrd was very big on those, and everybody deferred to him. But their rules are not in Roberts. In fact, they contradict some of the things in Roberts. Different countries can have different rules in their houses of parliaments or whatever. So Henry Roberts came up with what was originally a little book, and it was be a guide for running a meeting. And as time went on, it got popular. People picked it up, and they said, well, what about this case? And what about that case? So the little book got bigger and bigger and bigger until it became this gigantic kind of reference book that you could look up a subsidiary motion and right of personal privilege and all these kinds of things. So it's meant to be a reference that you would go to when you need it. But the other thing is, I said official Roberts, right? So as you know, all people, General Roberts died. That happens, right? And he had a family that said, well, this guy's got something that's worth something, so they continued publishing his book. And then his granddaughter took it over, and I don't know where it is today. Those are the official Roberts according to the family. But there's other people who have come out with, wait a minute, here's his original, and I think something went wrong along the line here, so we've got this version. So you might find a different version of Roberts. Parliamentary procedure doesn't say anything about Henry Roberts. It says parliamentary procedure. You can have any parliamentary procedure you want. There's basic organizations of parliamentarians that basically agree or disagree on what's good procedure. But nothing in there says Roberts is the only official guide and what Roberts you're talking about. So I always point this out to every NABJ chapter that asks me. They say, well, we use Roberts. I said, well, what Roberts do you use? And they go, and they're not sure. And secondly, if they really look at it, they probably realize that they're not necessarily using Roberts. It's not indigenous to NABJ. You will have any number of meetings where somebody gets up and says, I have Roberts, or according to Roberts. And so, there's a question. Look at it again as a journalist. What exactly are they referring to? What are they talking about? By the way, so there's other parliamentary guys. There's one kind of cool one that goes back to the Roberts short version. This is like 20 odd years ago. A parliamentarian named Susan Goers, that was her name, Goers, which was kind of cool for one who goes to meetings, came up with the Goers Guide. And I like it, kind of cute. It's a short version, doesn't get into all the contradictory stuff that Roberts gets into, or the official Roberts. So that is I'm sorry for being kind of loquacious on that, but you kind of need to know that, because as a journalist, you wouldn't take a city councilor saying something about, we use the Morrison method without finding out what the Morrison method is, or knowing if that person is actually referring to something specifically. Sometimes people make stuff up, right? So that being said, where does it fit in the hierarchy of things? The first line of power, if you will, or regulation or whatever, for your organization is your organization's own constitution and or bylaws. Your rules that say what your organization is and basically how it operates. Then it may at the end say anything not discussed in here may be covered by Roberts. And then it would be good practice to say what Roberts you're talking about. And by the way, going back to that Scott Forsman, direct descendant of Henry Roberts, that changes over years. It has so many additions. So If you have referred to one, I mean, my last copy is about 2 editions old. So if you referred to one when you made your Constitution in 1997, you might want to go back and see if that's the same thing. Okay. Bruce is asking, what chapter is the best example of all policies? I can't quite say that, but we just went through the New York chapter's rewrite of their bylaws. And that's pretty good. I think Atlanta was pretty good. I think that's one that we based it on. Boston is my old chapter. It should be in good order. If I operated it using it, I don't remember anything standing out being out of order. I'm going to go back a little. Yep.
In Philly.
Philly. Some of these were recently revised, and I think that goes back to what I was just saying about what Roberts are you referring to. It's like the United States, Constitution. We have amendments, right? So these things are not static documents. They don't just sit there, and once you write it, it's good forever. You may realize, very importantly, that some of the things in the Constitution don't work, don't really apply to your organization. So you may want to change it. It should not be easy to change. So usually a 2/3 vote is required. If you think about that, most of your chapter meetings, wherever you are, most of your votes are unanimous, right? I mean, and maybe it's because they're small things, but you basically agree on stuff. If there is a disagreement, then that's healthy. And that goes back to the purpose of parliamentary procedure, which is to affect the will of the majority while respecting the rights of the minority. So don't feel bad if you have a contested vote. That's healthy. And don't feel bad if you don't. That's healthy too. It means that you get along, which is not bad. I'm going to share a little bit of the thing. I don't want to go through this whole presentation, but there were a few more points on it. As I find it, it's a little difficult on here. All right. So that's what that was. The main motion. So somebody was asking about, do you need a motion for those treasurer activities? And let's talk about what a motion is. The first one is the main motion. So I move that we allocate, $253 to publish a list of our scholarship winners on glossy paper or something like that. Once this motion, yep. What's that?
Your email signature is showing.
Okay, but can you see the screen with the main motion? Nope.
No.
Nope. All right. Well, I can talk about this, and so I'll just talk about it. I'll use it as a guide. Something very important for the most agreed upon parliamentary procedures, whether Roberts or otherwise, with the exception of the United States Congress, is there can only be one main motion on the floor at the time. So if Greg makes a motion, actually, frankly, the treasurer should not make a motion. It's just not the best practice about something for the treasurer. So it'd be nice if Corey made the motion saying to authorize the treasurer to write a check for $253 for the scholarship book. Okay. Once he does that, we are now discussing the main motion. We don't need Linda to say, well, I want to make a motion that Robin make the books himself because he knows how to do it and he's got his own printing press. Now you got two conflicting motions, or maybe they agree on the floor at the same time. Which do you take up? Weirdly, once again, the United States Senate does this. I think it's whacked. And the result is, something's good, something's bad. But in general parliamentary procedure, only one motion on the floor at the same time. However, once Corey's made that motion and it's been seconded, we now get into subsidiary motions. And these are actions that you take on that main motion. So one is the one that would come pretty quickly is to postpone indefinitely. And that would, in effect, kill the motion. Because if you don't have a time that you're going to pick it up again, it sends it off into the netherworld. So that's one thing that could happen. And if that's going to happen, that should be one of the first motions made. A second one, and this is the biggest one, and we're all familiar with it, is to amend or substitute. Or one that I personally like is strike. So Linda may come up with the motion that says, I want to amend the motion. And so Corey's motion was authorize $253 to Greg to publish a scholarship book. And she wants to amend the motion and strike the name of Greg and substitute Robin and strike $253 and substitute use his own printing press. Okay? And now, she's amended that motion. And another thing you can get down to, the next level is, by the way, that would have to be moved and seconded. So if no one seconds that, it dies. But let's say Linda does that, Corey seconds that. Okay. So now Chauncey does. Let's broaden this whole process up. Now you can actually go to, bear with me on this one, and I can send this presentation that I have separately so that you can follow what it's saying. Amend the amendment. You're actually allowed to do that, right? And somebody says, well, they saw the work Robin was doing, and his printing press is awful. And they know that Melanie has a better printing press. So they're going to strike on the amendment Robin and put Melanie in there. This is all getting complicated and hard to follow, right? But bear with it. This is why we take it seriatim. One motion, one event, one amendment at a time. So this actually gets seconded. And now we're talking about amending the amendment. Or actually, let's say in this case, it doesn't get seconded. So it dies. And we don't get to entertain the whole idea of Melanie's better printing press. All right? You may think the next thing coming up is amend the amendment to the amendment. You can't do that. The furthest you can go is to amend the amendment. Thank God. Otherwise, you would be there all day. So in this case, this scenario, I'm going to not have that one survive. And now we're back to talking about the amendment. And the amendment says that we're going to strike Greg's name, put in Robin, strike $253, and say use his own printing press. We now can vote on that. Actually, there's a few other things we could do. It could be referred to a committee. It could be postponed to a certain time. And that's not really killing it because maybe somebody realized, oh man, the meeting is going to end. We got to talk about this, but we can't do it now. So, next Tuesday at 3 o'clock is a better time to do it. Or maybe the senator has just walked in a room. We need to hear her presentation. So we want to postpone until after the senator. Every chapter has done that one, okay? We also might want to limit or extend times of debate. Now, people are talking about Robin's printing press and they like Greg, he's good at spending money or whatever it is. And all this is in the whole debate of the thing. And we realize that Melanie has chimed in like 5 times. And so we may want to limit debate and say each person can speak one more time on this subject. If you've gone to the NABJ business meeting, the basic practice is that we limit each speaker to 1 time per subject and to 2 minutes per speaker. That is actually not in our bylaws or our Constitution. That is actually introduced at each meeting. And usually it passes, but sometimes it's a hot issue that we're talking about, and sometimes that does not. Sometimes the part about 1 time per speaker, people need to say a second time. So those are possibilities that you can entertain or not. This is, again, a higher level motion that needs more than a majority, because what you're talking about is affecting the will of the organization. And so to have a motion to limit or extend debate would require a 2/3 vote. All right? So let's say none of that has happened, and I think on my cheat sheet here, that's as far as it goes, right? Somebody finally says, call the question. And that actually also, I believe, is a 2/3 vote. I'll be happy to be corrected on that. And that means to end debate on this thing. So now we are voting on, remember, the amendment. And now you see why we take it seriatim, one thing at a time. And so we're voting on the amendment, which would strike Greg's name and put Robin's name in, and strike the purchase and put in use your own printing press. That vote happens. And if it's a voice vote, all in favor, there's a whole bunch of ayes, it's obvious who won. If it's aye and then nay, and it sounds pretty much the same, then you would, someone could say division of the House, which is not talking about dividing us. It means simply counting the vote, going through and having a roll call, okay? And so let's say the amendment passes. And now the amendment is to authorize Robin to use his own printing press to print the scholarship list. And I love Corey's yawn right there, because that's part of the whole issue. You got to stay awake during these things. And some of these things can actually go on forever, and that can affect it because people leave the room. If you're talking about a 2/3 majority, maybe a certain group leaves the room or something like that, and now another group is, if you will, in power or whatever. But anyway, we are now voting on that main amendment. It has been changed. It no longer says Greg is authorized to spend $253. It is now saying that Robin should print this thing. I can't remember who in my scenario I said was the sponsor of that amendment, but that person who made that amendment may actually not like it anymore. They saw what Robin prints. They think it's terrible. So now this person may end up voting against her own amendment, her own motion, right? That happens. And the reason I point that out is that person, you may think, well, she made the motion in the first place. She owns this. She should be proud of it. It's something really great. Well, not necessarily. It changed. And the key point of all this is to take emotion out of it. So she shouldn't feel, actually, I think it was Corey I said made this, so he shouldn't feel a personal attachment. Oh, I got to get my amendment, my motion passed, right? His whole thing was getting the scholarship book printed. And his whole thing was the way he wanted it done, which was having Greg go out and pay for it, right? So he may, in the end, vote against his own motion, all right? So let's say the vote happens and it does pass, and now Robin is supposed to go out and print the scholarship booklet himself, which is fine, and that's the will of the majority, but the minority's been heard. And interestingly, in this scenario, Corey ended up voting against his own motion. I'm going to close. Actually, I don't think this share is on. All right. So one quick one I'm going to mention here is somebody might be asking, couldn't you avoid all this with a friendly amendment, right? So Corey makes the motion that Greg publish this thing. And Melanie comes up with a friendly amendment, says, I'd like to make a friendly amendment that Robin just print this thing. Corey, do you accept this? People will ask. And a lot of organizations do this. And Corey says, no. Most parliamentarians, and I can't say all, agree that friendly amendment is not good parliamentary practice. Robert's interesting, in all his 900 pages, does not actually say anything about friendly amendments. There are some parliamentary books that do. And here's why. It sounds nice to say friendly amendment, and it sounds like it's keeping the peace, and it's an easy way of avoiding that long, complicated scenario that I just had of all those amendments and amendments to amendments and motion to strike and all that kind of stuff. But as boring as that was, and I did catch Corey in a yawn there, right? It did guide us through very carefully and very meticulously the process, and we knew what we were talking about at each stage of the game. And if you didn't, it's always allowable for any member to ask the chair to repeat the motion or tell us where we are. In fact, it's encouraged to do that. If you do the friendly amendment and Corey accepts it, well, yeah, that was a shortcut and it's real cool, and he's all happy and we're all happy and we vote for the thing and Robin gets to print the book. But if Corey doesn't accept it, you actually just created an opportunity for emotion to creep into this process. Because now Corey is kind of mad. You know, this person wants to change this thing. Do you accept it? No. You just created a fight on the floor. And that is why I would be of what I would think is the overwhelming majority, but not the entirety of parliamentarians that would be against friendly amendments. In essence, they're only friendly when they are friendly. And if they're not friendly, they've created a problem. So Corey doesn't accept it. Now what do we do? There is another way to do that, which is more antiseptic and less emotion, which is Melanie says, well, I would rather have Robin print the book or whatever for free. Corey, would you entertain withdrawing your motion and resubmitting it? And he might want to do that. And if he says yes, then he does. The second usually should be withdrawn too, and they start all over. That way you can avoid all that amendment and amendment to amendment. Either way is acceptable, but I would say what is not acceptable is the friendly amendment, and you take it or else you have a fight. So I don't want to belabor this too much. I think that's as much as one can take in, but remember what I said. Procedures are to help you do what you're doing, not to say you must do this or you must do that. I mean, there are strong rules, what I just said, but the point is we need to print this booklet, right, in some way. And we need a guide to decide how to do that, that respects the opinion of everybody in the room, the majority and the minority. So I'll leave there or open up for questions. I can't believe there's no questions on this one.
There is one.
Yep, there's one. Must you have a quorum? You have to have a quorum for a 2/3 vote, indeed. So Bruce, I'm sorry, asked, must you have a quorum for a 2/3 vote? You have to have a quorum to have the meeting happen. Now, a quorum is an interesting thing. That goes back to the whole Roberts and different rules of order. What's a quorum? A quorum actually may be set however you want to set it. At NABJ, we have a really interesting wording for a quorum for the business meeting. We do not, at one point, for about 10 years or maybe 15, we said that it had to have a majority of the members at the for business to take place. Well, a majority of the members were certainly at the convention, but they weren't in that business meeting. It was usually Greg and me, Linda. I can name the people. It was about 200 people, unless it was a really, really heated subject. But usually it's be about 100, 200. Heated subjects, probably 500. We have had memberships rise and fall, but for the last 20 years or so, between 2,000 and 3,000 plus members. So inherently, almost all of our business meetings, even when we were down to, or earlier when we were only about 1,000, 1,500 members, we were nowhere near a quorum in the room, and that was a problem. And we were suspending the rules each time at the business meeting to allow the meeting to take place. So finally, we rewrote. It had to be a constitutional change because it was the Constitution that said what a quorum was. we rewrote it and said a majority of the membership must be at the convention for the business meeting to be valid or something like that. That doesn't mean they had to be in a room, but what it was recognizing is everybody had the opportunity to be in a room. If you wanted to go to the Boys to Men concert, which we hope wasn't at the same time, that was your business. But you had opportunity to be in a room. So that's what a quorum is for NABJ. Most organizations wouldn't have a quorum like that. Most would. Tyler Perry, yeah. If Tyler Perry had, it wasn't even that Tyler Perry was showing a movie. He was talking about the movie and he was in drag. And so who wanted to, go to the business meeting when that was happening, right? So, but anyways, quite seriously, most organizations would have a numerical or a percentage for a quorum. We don't. But in your local chapter, you may want to say that. You may want to say, but you got to be careful. How many people actually show up to your meeting, right? So if you say something like 50% of your membership and you only get 10 people at the meeting, 10 people is not unhealthy. If there's 10 people doing stuff every month, that can lead a chapter. That's a core of 10 people. But it's going to be a problem if you said that 51% have to be in the room and you actually have 500 members on the books. All right. Question. One issue we've had is whether the president can make a motion. Our president avoids this so that we can make sure we are in compliance with proper procedure. Can you clarify what we should be doing? And this is Melanie asking this. So it is the best practice for a president to do exactly as you're saying, is to avoid making a motion. The president is a unique person with unique powers. Once again, I would mention the United States Senate and Mitch McConnell, who's getting way more attention in this meeting than he should be, but he does a lot of stuff. Whether you like him or not, or agree with his policies or not, you have to admit he is a very effective leader. And by the way, he's a majority leader. He's not the Senate president. The way the United States works is the Vice President of the United States is the Senate president and basically presides, but the power is actually run by the majority leader. And one of the big things, one of the big parts of power that is reserved to the majority leader is whether or not to bring something to the floor in the first place. And as everybody in this room and everybody in our profession should know, it's virtual room, I should say, no better or no stronger or clearer manifestation of that power was ever exercised in my memory than in the decision not to entertain the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, right? So the president, and I'm going to recognize, even though he isn't, Mitch McConnell is sort of the president of that body, because de facto he is, even though the vice president is technically the president. The person leading the meeting, let's put it that way, has an awful lot of power, even if they don't make the motions. And the other thing is the president should be aware of everything going on, as much stuff going on in the room and that will go on at that meeting as possible. So if you think about it, does the president actually need to be distracted by framing a motion? So let's go back to the whole thing of the scholarship booklet, right? And let's say Corey's leading the meeting. And Corey is thinking about, I've got that senator coming at 3 o'clock. I've got somebody else wants to talk about donuts. Believe it or not, I've actually been in an organization where we had a long discussion about donuts. I'm sending a funny little parliamentary exercise that talks about donuts, but it actually has happened, okay? So he's got all this he's juggling. And when you make a motion, it shouldn't just be so moved. So you shouldn't say something about, yeah, we should print the program book. Yeah, Greg can get that done. Okay, so moved. No. That didn't say what was moved. That didn't state what the motion was. Or even if you threw in there, yeah, Greg can get that done. How much is that, Greg? Oh, it's about $253. Okay, so moved. Is there a second? Second. No. What the heck just happened, right? So someone should say, I motion that Greg be authorized to expend $253 for the purchase of a program book or a scholarship book. Corey really doesn't need to be thinking about all of that meticulous language, particularly if it's something that just comes up then. Maybe they weren't initially planning on talking about a program book, right? Maybe this meeting was more about the senator is going to come speak to us. And someone said, oh, you know, we got to have the scholarship book by next month. Oh, man, we do? All right. So now Corey's going to be interrupted in his juggling all these things happening in the meeting to come up with this language. Best is, as he's leading this, is to say, is there a motion? And in a good, realistic way of working at it, remember, parliamentary procedure is supposed to help you, not hinder you, is someone says, give me 5 minutes and I will work up a motion on it. And they take the time to write it out clearly in the first place. And since it hasn't been introduced, you don't have to have a motion to postpone, right? It hasn't been made. Corey says, cool. And he goes on to talking about the donuts. Then he comes back to the scholarship booklet. All right? So that's an argument for the president not making motions. And I mean, the president can, unless your particular document says the president can. But I just think it's better practice for the president to preside and to sort of delegate things out or entertain motions. Julie is saying, I'm a president who abstains from making motions. Like I said before, I learned the hard way that I need to read the Roberts Rules Cliff Notes. Yep, that sounds like a good practice. And Melanie says, thank you, and I'll say you're welcome. I think this is a lot to take in. I will send more of those Cliff Notes and some examples in the funny donut video. And always here, I'll post my information again to answer any of these questions, as Corey knows, because he's been asking me an awful lot.
Robin, just out of curiosity, what's your viewpoint about the president actually voting on a motion that is either before the board or the general membership? I know, like, when we do our board of directors meetings, our president does not vote, only votes in case to break a tie.
Right. So it's NABJ practice to do that, and our local constitutions are suggested to emulate the NABJ constitution or bylaws. I say suggested because they can talk about things that are indigenous to themselves. Different geographies have different considerations. I can't think of any right now, but they may be. But something like that, it's best to adhere to the model set by NABJ. That being said, some of those Roberts say that's not true. The president can vote. The president didn't stop being a member. A president of the United States who shall remain unnamed at the moment actually does have the right to go into a polling place, right? Wherever the hell he lives, and pull a lever and vote once, right? When 2020 comes around. So, but that's not quite the same as the vice president, Mr. Pence, voting in the Senate. And the motto NABJ has is that motto of presiding over the Senate, but only having a vote in the case of a tie. Now, why is this so? I think I would go back to the scenario I just painted about the president not making motions, because the president has all these things, as Julie's pointing out, that she's doing. You know, you're juggling all this stuff. You got these speakers coming. You've got the donut issue. You got whatever. If you have the motion, let's go back to the one about printing the scholarship booklet, right? And it finally gets down to the main motion is that you're voting on, and that's the one that said Robin's going to do it on his own press or whatever. And Julie calls out, okay, all in favor. And there's this big roar, aye, and, all opposed. And it was just Corey in the first place because he didn't like that one, right? And he says, nay. Okay. It's pretty obvious who voted. So the president actually doesn't have to vote in that case, do you? In most cases, it's a voice vote, and as president is busy running a meeting, that vote is not really necessary. However, if they say all in favor, and it is aye, those opposed, nay, sounds local, someone calls for division of the House, i.e. count the votes, right? Now that president, well, actually, so now you count the votes, it is a tie, and now the president casts a vote. And you see what I mean? It's not really necessary for the president to vote. In fact, it's a distraction from presiding. It can be, unless it is necessary where you have a tie. So, and when I say it's a distraction, it would be something like all in favor, say aye, aye. Did you hear what I just said? I'm the president. So I go, all in favor, say aye, aye. Right? That's kind of, or all in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay, nay. So nay, nay doesn't get a vote.
It's a TV show.
That's right. But Tyler Perry does. Jamar is saying, just want to clarify, did I say members in attendance could vote on measures or just board members? So your local chapter, it's usually members in attendance. It should be, your board, if you have a separate board meetings, most local chapters may have executive board meetings, but there isn't really a board. Some do. Some have advisory boards, but there isn't a board of 10 people in addition to the executive officers that exist. Again, some may have this. If there are some issues that are written down in your bylaws that are reserved for the board to do, so be it. But for the most part, most of the meetings are open, and you're talking about open voting for everybody. What's important, though, is what's a member, right? And so you need to know if you allow associate members a vote. That's not consistent, nor does NABJ say it has to be. NABJ does not have associate members and student members voting except for their own representatives, all right? But local chapters associate may mean something different. So maybe they do vote. Frankly, everyone I've been in, associates are fine as far as voting. A big one in a lot of organizations I am is paid members, okay? So somebody shows up, they've been a journalist in town for 120 years and everybody knows them and all, and we talk about that scholarship thing and they give some old history. When I was first started the thing, blah, blah, and they were a founder of the thing, and they haven't paid in 10 years. Do you allow this person to vote? Some of these things can be uncomfortable, but again, this is where parliamentary procedure can help you, because if it clearly says paid members, right, then you say, well, Mr. Morrison, we appreciate your work founding an organization and all that. By the way, I just want to remind everybody, so you don't single them out, that paid members voting is, of course, the province of paid members, and Mr. Morrison should get the hint at that point. Anything else? I will again paste my information, although in the doc it should be available already. And my pronouns, in case you weren't sure. And I thank everybody for their attention and for bearing with it. It is tedious stuff. There's no question, but I do hope you understand by taking things seriatim, you know exactly what you're talking about, and you're able to stop every moment and say, what are we talking about? We're talking about the amendment to the amendment. Okay. All right. And that's all we're talking about right now. We're not talking about three things on the floor at the same time. Again, some bodies do that. The United States Congress does that. I think it's weird. Town meetings in New England tend to do that. It's kind of strange, but most basic parliamentary procedure organizations do not do that, and that's the practice we abide by. And thank you, Linda.
So while we're getting more questions, I'll discuss it for you, just in case if someone might have a similar question. So how often should chapters revise their governing documents? And what if the bylaw doesn't say, like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what if the bylaw doesn't, maybe I like the structure of all, the revision process.
Sure. Well, bylaws should say the revision process, which is simply something like this Constitution may be amended by a 2/3 vote, or this, majority vote. Who knows? I mean, it's whatever the will of the membership is. Usually, to change the Constitution, it should take a higher standard. So usually 2/3 vote. But you could put in whatever provisions you want. You could say, however, no amendment this Constitution may be amended by a 2/3 vote, introduced yearly, or something like that. You may not want every meeting somebody changing the Constitution. That'll get dizzy. A really important thing, by the way, is to update all the records. So once that Constitution is changed, somebody needs to get in there and make sure that the Constitution that you may have online or printed is reprinted or is revised online. Minnesota, it's the only state I've worked in. Illinois, Massachusetts, some other New England states, Minnesota and Wisconsin. Minnesota has a very good Office of the Reviser of the Legislature. So every time they pass laws, and they have a yearly session, not a full year session, at the end of that session, the reviser revises the laws and puts down what happened and that the new law is in there. Not every state does that. And it's kind of scary. I've actually written some articles about laws that people forgot they passed, and they were a big emotional issue. And then 2 years later, they didn't enforce it, So that's one thing. But how often? Most don't require that you change it. Some may say, as I just said, that you don't change it too often. But I have it's a thinking that I've acquired recently, that some laws should be sunsetted. I write editorials for the Boston Globe, and recently I've snuck into some editorials this exact thing, that the legislature should consider new rules. This is a real editorial about allowing scooters. So you got those electric scooters run all over the city. We don't have them in Boston yet. I'd split my time between Boston and Minnesota. And so the one reason they don't have them is that the law in Massachusetts talks about mopeds, and it doesn't really have a category for scooters. It says they have to have turn signals and brake lights, and most of these scooters don't. Some do, actually. So we editorialized that they need to change the law, blah, blah, blah. And then I managed to convince the editorial board, and whatever they write, they should revisit it in 5 years. Because by that time, we're going to have Marty McFly's skateboard flying all over the place. And these laws will not have thought about that. And so sunsetting is actually kind of important. What we suggested, now mind you, the Massachusetts legislature doesn't have to pay any attention to the Globe, but if they think they do, so if they do, we suggested that the law they write should actually sunset, that 5 years from now, this is invalid, to force the legislature to reconsider or to consider what the various modes of mobility will be at that time. So I don't know that how that applies necessarily to an NABJ chapter, but think about it. Journalism changes extremely rapidly now, right? Our whole thing of who's a member, I was getting into that a minute ago with associate members, right? So what's a digital journalist? We have vice presidents of print. What's print? You know? And so these are things that we might want to consider 5 years from now, if that long, right? I wouldn't necessarily mandate it that the Constitution must be revised every 5 years, but you might want to say review. And these days, I say is good practice. Sonny is asking, doesn't see my links. Is that to me or it's to all panelists? So I'll let Corey answer that.
Okay, I see a note here from Julie Walker. What are your feelings about board members attending board meetings and general body meetings? Do you think there needs to be some sort of requirement on how many they can miss without a valid reason? Also, if their job precludes them from attending half the meetings, is that an issue? Maybe the bigger question is what kind of commitment is needed from board members? Okay, basically, you've thrown the grenade in the room, so here's my answer. If you choose to run for and win a seat on the board, know the commitment you have to make and be very clear with your employer. I am on the board of this association. We have regular meetings and we have some called special meetings. Some of them may or may not conflict with my working hours. I'll try my best to notify you well in advance to avoid conflicts like that. As far as missing meetings at the local level, that's something each chapter has to set its own rules and bylaws on as to how many meetings you can miss and what it defines a miss. For example, if the treasurer is not physically there but has sent in a written report, has the treasurer missed their obligation? Maybe yes, maybe no. If the vice president for digital doesn't show up for whatever reasons, that may be a different kind of situation if they don't have a report to produce. So each chapter should have their own rules on it. But understand, when you agree to raise your hand and say, yeah, I'll volunteer, I'll do this, I'll run for this office, it's more than just winning an election and having a title. You have to honor that commitment as much as you'd honor that commitment to your family, your fraternity, your sorority, your circle of friends. You're expected to deliver on this. And at times it is inconvenient, and at times you will miss things, but you give it your level best. I hope that answers your question, Julie.
Actually, and I have an amendment.
Friendly or not so friendly?
It'll be friendly, but it's not parliamentarily friendly, so you don't have to accept it or not. But I have this situation going on right now on another organization, nothing to do with journalism, that I am actually the president of the board at the moment. And I have an officer who has not shown up to a meeting in about 6 months. She has participated by phone. We allow that. And it's speakerphone. She's been in the votes. She's heard the meetings. She's actually made motions. So you could say she's participating. We happen to have a rather sensitive issue with the former employee. This is, a working organization that does involve some degree of money, and it's quite public. And so we have a legal situation going on with, we have a sort of a problem. And the point is, I've spent a lot of time with the executive. We have full-time executive director. I spent a lot of time with the executive director, and I kind of need backup because I can't do this all myself, and I kind of need, frankly, this is the vice president. So we have, here I'm saying this in a public forum, someone can figure out what group this is. But in short, I've considered asking this person, at least in a quiet setting, hey, what is your commitment? What, are you able to participate? If something happens to me now with this situation going on that's rather sensitive, is there someone who could take my place? So I was about to have this, and I will have this conversation, but it occurred to me, and I had had this conversation with the executive director, that I was going to have this conversation with this other board member. But it occurred to me, before I do this, I need to check something. I need to check her donor status. She may be a very big donor. Do I want to, in essence, diss her? Would she interpret it as a diss? Who knows? I need to find this out. So this is something that every organization that I've been in and offered parliamentary advice and was accepted has heard me say, is you have the political and the procedural and the political. And procedurally, you may be able to do something, which is you may be able to have in your bylaws something that says if you miss 3 meetings, you must sacrifice your office, or you're no longer an officer. Procedurally, you may want to do that. Procedurally, you can do that. Politically, you may not want to. That's the reality. And when I go back to leadership in, unfortunately, Mitch McConnell, this is what they're taking into consideration all the time. Procedurally, do they have to have a vote for the Supreme Court justice? Politically, do they want to have one? You can agree or not agree with the way that came out, but it was effective. I see questions showing up in a different arena here. Julie's saying we were told that does not go in the bylaws. It depends, and I don't know if I said that. Okay, in our operating procedure, that's NABJ practice, because the operating procedures are actually called board operating procedures, so they would address what the board does as opposed to the bylaws. But it could. I mean, in different organizations, it could be in the bylaws.
Just a quick reminder, folks. Every general meeting, treasurer's report should, in fact, must be produced and presented to the membership. It doesn't have to be a Dun and Bradstreet type of document, but it just needs to be clear enough how much you spent, how much you took in, how much you have left over, or if there's any extraordinary expenses that the membership should be aware of. And a copy of your transaction register should be available for your paid members to review and see there. Just because you have a visitor there doesn't mean they get to look inside your books to see how you spent your money. But the issues we've talked about on fiscal responsibility and processes, it's a lot of things to do, but if once you get in the habit of doing it, it will keep you out of trouble. It will also make it a lot easier when you apply for grants from various charities and foundations in your area if your books are clean or in relatively good shape. There are a number of groups in some cities that will help nonprofits, such as NABJ chapters, get their books in order or get their processes in order to qualify for grants. And more importantly of all, have a strong relationship with your accountant who makes sure you do all your filings with the state, local, and federal governments. If not, you will find that some jurisdictions can be extremely, extremely aggressive in seeking penalties for not complying with these rules. It is easier to do the work on the front end than to have to fix it on the back end. Hope I haven't scared people too bad.
So if you guys have questions, please type in the comment section.
I think most folks want to get up and go to the restroom or have the rest of their breakfast. Yes, yes, yes. Linda Lockhart asked, is it necessary to have two signers on all checks? I say yes, 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 yes. As I pointed out, here in Atlanta, this was back in the 80s. This happened here. We had a treasurer who was going out writing checks left, right, and indifferent by himself. And it was to support a drug habit. And we didn't realize what was going on until we went to the bank one day to do something. And they said, oh, you guys are down $4,500. What? And then come to find out that he'd been writing checks all by himself. So we made it a standard request with our bankers that you must make sure that all checks signed by the association, sent by the association, have two signatures on it. That prevents a lot of misunderstanding, like, oh, I didn't know so-and-so did that, or I didn't know she did that. You don't want that. And if more than one person has to be involved in signing a check, the responsibility is equally shared so that no one can say, hey, it slipped by me. This is not your personal money. This is the association's money. And in many cases, a lot of these folks know where you live and know what kind of car you drive. So it can make things a little interesting. I would highly recommend two signatures on every check.
Greg, you've been cutting in and out for me. I don't know if that's true
I'm
for
sorry.
everybody else.
Does everyone hear me okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? Okay, Linda, you're happy. Okay, it's just Robin. Okay, well, Robin's special. He's in Minnesota. Yeah. And I'm glad to have extended discussions with people about finances and process and procedure. We can do one-on-ones. Like I say, you have my mobile, you've got my email. Do not be afraid to call me. I will not take a call at 3 a.m. in the morning. I don't care who you are, unless the house is on fire.
I think I heard Greg said that he was glad to have discussions one-on-one, as am I. And and one more thing that I just wanted to, at least for me, wrap up on the parliamentary stuff is, again, it's supposed to help you run the organization, take the emotion out of it, not hinder it. But all that being said, you can have fun. You know, this is a volunteer group, right? It's Saturday morning. We're sitting here talking to a computer, all right? We got well, it's a lousy day here, but, you know, we got other things we could be doing, right? But, you know, let's have fun with this stuff. So I got to tell you, if you're comfortable, that's really important. If your board is comfortable with you or your membership is comfortable with you, if you're one of the leaders and you're all comfortable with each other, you know it's not personal. Corey and I disagree whether or not my printing press is better than Greg going out and finding somebody, right? We just happen to disagree. But that doesn't mean I take it personally or, you know, we fight over it. So that's what parliamentary procedure is supposed to diffuse. But the second thing is having fun. And I got to say, one of the boards I'm on where I'm president, we have a sort of running joke that Jen always makes a motion and Vern always second, right? So we talk about X, Y, Z. Somebody gives a report. One of the things is accepting a report. When the treasurer gives a report, the treasurer should not make a motion to accept the treasurer's report. You're the one who wrote this thing. Why should we? So that should really come from a third party. The second thing is you don't approve a treasurer's report. Greg could have all kinds of crazy stuff in there, right? Sounded good. You approved it? I think I want my accountant to approve it. We accept what he said, all right? And later it turns out we're all journalists. When we looked at line 43, whoa! All right? So we accept it, he said that, not, and I'm not saying anything about Greg, but you know. So, but in any case, the running joke in this group that I happen to be, one of the groups I happen to be president of right now, Jen makes the motion. So Greg gives a report, and I said, do I hear a motion to accept the report? And Jen says, I move we accept Greg's report. And Vern always says, and I second it. So on not silly, but inconsequential motions, such as a motion to adjourn, we all want to leave, right? It's a nice day, we want to go somewhere, right? So at the end of the motion, and I'll sometimes say something, I just did this. I said, and did I hear Jen make a motion to adjourn? All right, that's legal. Because she said, yes, you heard me, Jen, as I make a motion to adjourn. And did I hear Vern second that? And what was funny this last time was Julie jumped in, not our Julie, a different Julie. And she said, no, you didn't. I make the motion to the second to adjourn. All right. We turned the whole thing into a parody of itself, but it was completely legal. All right. And understand, you can have fun like that, right? And think about that. If somebody does that 3 times in a row, like our Jen, if you notice, she's always making the motion to accept or to move that we buy the furniture or whatever the heck it is, she becomes a usual suspect. And it might even be nonverbal, right? So you can say, and is there a motion to that effect? And I'm sitting there staring at Julie or Jen, whoever it is, right? You know, she'll stare back at me or something like that. It's silly, but those are the things that can liven up a meeting, make it fun to attend. Everybody who left the meeting of this organization I'm talking about last week left with a smile on their face.
This has been a fun day for me, you know. Now I can go get my coffee.
And now you're really faded, but whatever it was, I know it was good.
I need coffee. Pour me one, Chauncey. I'm reading the notes here. Corey, it's your meeting.
Any more questions?
Oh, Linda Lockhart had a question about who can help with rewriting and updating bylaws. I'm seeing this in the chat, yeah.
Oh yeah, I just saw it. I think you could also reach out to the I can't answer for Robin, but you can also reach out to the Constitutional and Operating Procedures Committee for assistance on that. And I think you're a member of Milene Burney. She's a former NABJ parliamentarian. I can forward you her contact information. Not a problem. Are there any more questions before we wrap up? So I think since no one else have any questions, I think we're going to wrap up now. And thank you, Greg and Robin, again for your time, and also to our excellent.
I will second that.
Yeah. And to our excellent, local chapter leaders, you guys are doing an incredible work, on the local level. So I want to thank you guys for your amazing service to the organization. And going forward, we will definitely have more training webinars for you guys. And I think we should have one on the 6th. Yeah, we should be having one on the 6th of June. And the office will forward more information about that to all of the local chapter leaders. So thanks again for your time, and I hope you guys learned something new. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Greg, or Robin. And if you also have any ideas, of like webinar ideas, you can also forward them to me as well, so we can have some more of these going forward.
Kathy asked if it was recorded. I think it is being recorded. I'm not sure when it'll be played back.
Yes, it's being recorded and it will be posted online by Monday. Yeah, it's being recorded. Thank you for joining, Natasha. So I think that's it.
See you folks on June 6th or sooner.
Yep. Have a good one, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good one, Alvin.